Ask the Podcast Coach for August 13th, 2022.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means, hey, it's Saturday. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Collison from theaverageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Good to be back on a Saturday. Big thanks to Dave Hooper, who filled in for me again last week. And Dave, that's not again bad. That's again good. Did a nice job. It's hard to bring it a couple weeks in a row. He filled in for me, I think, in between. But big thanks. Good show. I listened to it on the way home. I had to go help my mother-in-law prepare to move, which I hate moving.
Oh.
But I don't mind helping other people move. So I drove down to Texas, spent some time with them, and then drove back up. So listen to it on the way back. Well done.
It sounds like a fun time, though. How long a drive from Nebraska to Dallas?
Yeah, it's 12 hours.
And you did that in one weekend?
One shot. Yeah, well, Friday, I left like 6 o'clock on Friday. Now that we hit Dallas at rush hour, so that was a 14-hour day. Let's just be clear about that. And then, but got me thinking about podcast movement as I was driving through Dallas. I was like, I could come back in 2 weeks and be here I won't be, but I thought about it. And then 12-ish on the way back. It's not bad. You see nothing. It's, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Topeka, Wichita, Omaha. And it's a straight shot. So good time to catch up on podcasts. I listened hours. Do you find, Dave? Hold on. I got a question for you. Let's do what we need to do, and then I'll come back to the question.
Okay. Well, I don't know why I have somehow lost the ability to remember where all the fun-filled sound effects are. Oh, that's why. It's pink. I labeled it wrong because, driving had to make you thirsty.
Oh, for sure. Can you? I drank a lot of coffee.
Yeah, that's always fun. That'll lead to some frequent stops. But that coffee pour is brought to you by our good friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. We're going to see if Dave can upload slides. He can, and do a commercial at the same time. Mark is awesome because not only is he a phenomenal graphic artist, but he's also a podcaster. He's going to sit down with you and talk to you about your podcast, about your website, about your lead magnet, your artwork, whatever you need. And he's going to listen to your show to make sure that it matches whatever vibe you're trying to send out there. And I don't know that you're going to get that from some cheapskate on Fiverr. Mark is going to do it, and he's going to do it right there next to you so he completely understands what you're trying to do. And that way, you don't have to do it over and over and over. Now, he will, if for some reason his first draft doesn't match exactly what you're looking for, but between you and me, that's never happened. He usually gives you a couple different options, and I just go, yes, that one. And that's how it works. So if you want to look great, check out Mark over at podcastbranding.co.
Always so good. Of course, big thanks to our friend over there, Dan Lefebvre. We're Based on a True Story podcast, found at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. Dan was actually on Home Gadget Geeks 2 weeks ago. So the Thursday before I left to go down to Texas, Dan came on the show. We had a good time talking tech and some camera stuff. So if you're interested in that kind of conversation around it and pictures and cameras and podcasting and that kind of stuff, Dan joins me. HomeGadgetGeeks.com. Dave, that was one of those episodes that I recorded, edited, produced, made a blog post all before I went to bed on Thursday. I normally do the video on Friday, and then I do the show notes on Saturday. And I was going to be on the road. I just didn't want to mess around with, I didn't want to mess around with trying to do it remotely or whatever. So it's funny. You can compress, I compress that all. Normally that maybe be a 4-hour process, and I probably compressed it into 2 just to get it done. Dan was a great guest, though. Great to have him on. And so, Dan, appreciate you coming on.
And what's fun is I'm behind the scenes trying to find my own Twitter Spaces. And because it dawned on me, like, I forgot to start that. And
they don't need to hear all the shenanigans that we do in the beginning.
Well, it's so weird because you're like, all right, I should be able to find my own. It is mine after all. So I'm holding down the Twitter Spaces button, and that's nothing going on. They now have a Twitter Space button at the top. Maybe if I go to my profile, I realize that this is riveting audio. Why introducing? Have you seen this? Twitter's now pimping NFTs.
Oh,
they're like, you want to add an NFT to your profile? I'm like, no, here we go. I'm like, I just want to find my
crypto's recovering nicely right now. If you're into that value for value proposition that Todd keeps talking about, and you're getting Satoshis instead of 2 cents, they're worth maybe 3. But
that's the fun thing.
That's a pretty big increase, though. 2 to 3,
33%. I'll take it, right?
Yeah, right on.
Well, what's interesting is I found there's this tool called Albi. In fact, I'll be making a video on this. It's much easier now to set your show up to be, I just found out something very bad. Okay, we're going to close down the Twitter Space. If you've already started pressing record on the Roadcaster and you realize, oops, I forgot to set up Bluetooth to tie into the phone. They're not going to let you do that.
Sorry, Twitter.
Sorry, Twitter Spaces. Anyway, so it's super easy now to set your podcast up. What is still kind of missing, although it is getting better, is how do it's not one click easy yet for the listener, because there are new podcast apps. This show is set up to do that, but I started using this Albi. It's ALBY. I think it's getalbi.com to set that up. And it's cool, but the kind of bad news is where before I was using a full node. We're going to get our nerd on here. And to make a long story short, I couldn't see what was going on. I logged into an app and it was like, oh, you've got, $13 over the last 6 months or something like that. So I never saw how the money was coming in. I just saw the total. And now I see how money is coming in. And there are people that are paying me, and again, I'm not complaining, 2 Satoshis per minute, which when you do the math on it is 3 cents an hour. And I realize what's happened is there's an app called Fountain where people will the Fountain app will pay you Satoshis to listen, because they're trying to get people into like, what is this whole Satoshi thing? And so those same people who have no idea the value of a Satoshi, because it's a millionth of a millionth of a millionth of something. It's really Bitcoin. Of Bitcoin. And so it's interesting that I can now see, and I'll be able to see if people send a boost, which is where you can send a message and attach some sort of value to it. So it's that is getting easier. It's still not the thing, again, that I think if we really want that to work is you've got to be not a super geek, but it's still, at this point, I have to tie my bank to an app. I then take that app and send money to my wallet that sends money to the podcast. There's too many. There's like 3 things into it. But we do have some housekeeping. We have a follow-up to nice. A question that I was like, oh, this is great. And I looked through this. I don't think I put down who did this. This might be Randy Cantrell. Or I think it was Randy Cantrell that mentioned. But basically, if you have a sticky Zoom H6, the person wrote this in, and this was like 3 weeks ago, so I'm sorry it took so long to get to this. He said, I heard someone on the show last week talk about their Zoom H6 and the finish on the device being either kind of sticky or tacky. He says, I also have the same issue with mine, and after storing it in a hard shell case that it came in, if you've ever seen those, it's like this little plastic coffin for your Zoom H6. He goes, I did that for about 6 months. I removed the device to find the rubbery outer shell to be extremely tacky and sticky. And after hearing your show last week and hearing that someone else suffered from the same thing, I thought I would reach out to Zoom. And this was their response. Hello. This issue is covered under warranty regardless of the date of purchase. If you would like to ship your device to our office in New York, we can offer a new replacement at no cost. To set up a return, I will need the following information to write up an RA form, which is your name, your typical stuff. Please note you cannot send in the device without a return, so you have to have this form. But basically, it sounds like, sincerely, customer support from Zoom North America. Just have them go to the website and go to the contact form and explain the issue, and they'll send you that email. Hope this helps. Love the show. Boost. Oh, I do. It's Scott from Talking Beards podcast. You can find it at talkingbeards.com. So
it sounds like a defective, not a component, but a cover, right? Or right where whatever material they use is deteriorating.
That, or to me, it's just like if you spill Coke on the counter and you let it dry, it's just super sticky and it just collects dirt and everything. Yeah. And
your mice have the same problem sometimes.
Yeah,
they've got that rubbery stuff on it.
Oh,
and if you never clean it, it kind of collects it, and then you go to touch it one day. Isn't that weird? It's actually been that way for a long time, but one day you notice and you're like, oh God, like what is this crawling off my mouse?
I think it's the same.
You looked on the underside of a mouse.
Oh,
it's dirty.
I just bought a new mouse pad because my mouse pad, which I then found out after I threw it away, I could have probably washed it. I didn't realize that, but Craig says I had a sticky H6. I thought it's the salt in the air because I live near the sea. I removed the stickiness off with a cloth and alcohol. Yep, when in doubt. It took me about 5 hours, though.
And Craig, did it ever get really back to its like original condition, or was it just good enough? Because with that kind of material, sometimes it just never really recovers, right? And it sounds like Zoom is starting to see that, and they're like, yeah, we got a bad batch in the manufacturing, or somebody put a cheap, I'm sure they contract the building of their products out. So somebody probably put that on there and they discovered it. Like, yeah, don't do that. Don't put that material on there. So sounds like they're going to cover it.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Daniel says, yeah, cheap rubber like that. He says, I had a Nintendo Wii with an official controller and a third party. The official rubber stayed nice for years while the third party dried, broke apart, and got sticky.
Yeah. That's disgusting too. When it just like, yuck.
Yeah. And
it's terrible.
You had mentioned how sticky mice get. DR says I'm thinking of switching to a trackball for editing. And those can be kind of cool. I had one once, and it was amazing because you don't move your mouse anymore. You just have to get really good with your thumb.
Yeah. But remember in the old days, before your mice were
right,
like you had a ball under there. And you'd have to pop that out from time to time because just like it was disgusting what would get caught up in the ball in there, right? You'd have to blow that out and do some other stuff. The hand trackball has the same problem. It's just skin and oil from your hands and toast. When you're eating, if you eat around your computer, some people don't, but I do. Gets in you ever taken your keyboard? I know. Well, we're talking about disgusting things. You ever taken your keyboard and just shook it out, like tapped it, hold it upside down, and tap it on your desk? And that'll
watch all the Dorito crumbs fall out the bottom.
Yeah, so somebody called that keyboard crumbles or keyboard trail mix was the.
Nice.
Yeah, it's disgusting. You're just like, oh, that was in my keyboard. Are you kidding me? So yeah, it's you don't if you're eating around your desk, and even if you're not, I mean, come on, we're human. Things come off of us and they make their way into the keyboard. Think about what's on your hands sometimes,
Well, it's almost as bad as your steering wheel. That's another one that you're like, all of a sudden one day you just look up and you're like, when did my steering wheel become two-tone? And it's like, it's just got gook all over it. Uncle Marv says, when I first worked at my first computer store, we got $30 for cleaning mouse balls. That's and the hard part of that is they're so hard to catch. Yeah. I had it set up. There we go. But we are going to bring back an old favorite. So we haven't talked about this in a long time, and I saw it 3 times in the Facebook group, which is good. It means we have new people podcasting, and they didn't know that. And that is, of course, Jim, you want to guess what
who should I go as a host provider?
That would be, I did see that. But that's not it.
What microphone should I use?
No, it's actually when I think about it, this is an old favorite, but when it comes up in droves.
How do I get more advertisers?
Can I play music on my podcast?
Oh, I didn't see that. I saw that one. And they got pretty adamant in the post that they were fairly sure, if we're talking about the same one.
Yeah, the 10-second rule. Yeah, 30-second.
I think it was 30-second rule. I'm pretty sure whoever posted it was like, I'm pretty sure there's a 30-second rule that allows you to, and Gordon and the like, when they're like, no, unfortunately. Dave, it's probably more important we don't talk about maybe the topic, but more of how we handle the topic. I think in those Facebook groups, we just the folks who are responding back are just, I know you're tired of hearing these things, but these people don't know this stuff. And we've had the advantage of being in those groups for years. And listen, we asked this question. The reason it's such an old question is because it's been asked by so many times before. Chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you didn't know this at some point in your podcasting journey either. You didn't know you couldn't use music on your stuff. So I think if I want to say one thing is still continue to be nice to people in the groups. Don't do the, if you just search for it, or, oh God, we talked about this 1,000 times. They don't know that. They just came in the group. Be kind. Just say, yeah, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. I always just picture it like if somebody was doing a presentation, right? And at the beginning of the presentation, they say, hey, there will be a recording for this in case anybody knows. And then somebody comes in 10 minutes later and they go, hey, is there going to be a recording of this?
Oh, yes. Yes.
So there's a part of you that wants to grow and you're like, hey, if you would have shown up on time. But on the other hand, like you said, they don't know. That's why they're asking. And it's better they learn now than, when they get a takedown notice. And Daniel says, I think it would help a ton if Facebook would suggest potentially relevant posts to a member whenever they start a new post. That would be great. Like some tech support. Yeah, I did that this morning. I am doing a presentation at Podcast Movement about the different stats you can get from Spotify and Google and Apple and now Amazon, and apparently not Stitcher. I went into Stitcher and I have no stats anymore, and I kind of threw it out on Facebook. I go, anybody else lose their stats in Stitcher? And a few people said, yeah, I got nothing. Oh. And so I reached out to Spotify because they have, I don't have my notes, but there's a thing, I think it's called starts, and then there are listeners. And both those are people that have listened to up to 60 seconds. Like if I hit start and stop immediately on Spotify, that counts as a start because it started. And then a listener is anybody that listens to any amount of your show. And I said, so if I understand this right, if I have an hour-long show and Susan hits start, now it's a start, listens to at least a minute of the show, now it's a stream, she listens for 5 minutes and hits stop. Then she goes to a store. She comes back out to her car, hits start again. That's another start. She listens for 5 minutes. That makes it a stream, but it's only one listener, right? So that's my whole thing, because most of the time starts and listeners are in the same boat because it's a listener is anybody that listened to any length. So I reached out to Spotify, and in the process of asking this question, they had 15 different blog posts. Do you need to read this first before sending it? I'm like, yes, I've read those. That's why I have this question. So that would be great if Facebook did that. It would be awesome as somebody's typing in, what's the best media? They just go, here, read this post. But
that begs the question, is Facebook a tech support platform?
No, but it'd be great.
I mean, we use it that way. Certainly we use it that way, but is it their responsibility to be, tech support? We see this all the time. Somebody will jump in and be like, hey, what's wrong with Anchor? And somebody will say, well, did you contact Anchor? Why? The wisdom of the crowd has gotten so strong in people's mind that people are going to know the answer before the organization knows the answer in some cases. And in some cases, it's actually true. But in most cases, the organization or the company that's doing it, that's really where the call should go to, or the tech support. They're going to know. And I get it. It's convenient to drop it in Facebook and just, post stuff. I love the questions that don't have any detail. You're just like, hey, what is red? You're like, could you be more specific on
my favorite at Libsyn is my episode's not showing up in Apple. Okay, well, what's your show and what episode would be handy for that?
Yeah, I need a few details.
Just need a little more details. Now, here's another side of this that when we talk about, well, they don't know this. Somebody said, hey, this was the post in Facebook, pro tips for podcasters. Okay. So this person's like, hey, I got some pro tips for you. Yeah. I've had my podcast since 2015 and currently in the top 3% in the world. All right. See, Jim's already laughing. If you want to measure your analytics on downloads across all platforms for podcasts, check out a program called PodTrack, because apparently your media host doesn't do that. If you want to see how your podcast stands globally, check out a program called Listen Notes. Just type it into Google. It will show, which is interesting because he's actually showing, it will show you a ton of information if you're looking for guests on your show, which is true. There are tons of groups on Facebook, which is true, such as Need a Guest, or go on Google and check out matchmaker.fm. That's interesting. If you're trying to leverage your podcast to grow your business, you want to interview your ideal clients. That's true. You want to find your super successful. You want to find both super successful and mid successful, I guess, there on the show. That will attract more people just like them, and you can then create funnels to sell to them. Mention your website on every episode you publish. Yes. When you're starting a podcast, you want to record at least 3 shows and upload them all at the same time. That's optional, not mandatory. This signals Apple, Google, Spotify, and Stitcher and more that you are going to be aggressive with uploading. Not necessarily true, but okay, I get your point. If you want to have a chance of becoming a top podcaster or get recommended, it's about the velocity of subscribers. And I was like, no, because I can get velocity of subscribers by hiring one of those guys that contacts me every half hour to say, would you like me to promote your show? Yeah. You know, like that's velocity of subscribers.
But if you really did have a high velocity of subscribers, it means you're doing things right. So like it in itself is not the trigger for a lot of things, but it is going to, like if you can get a lot of people, real people to subscribe very, very quickly, guess what?
Oh yeah,
you got some good momentum going on. Right?
We'll talk.
Bad thing.
We'll talk about Tanner Campbell in a second. He says the more subscribers you get in a short window of time, the more likely you are to succeed. Okay, yes, true. I'm happy to answer any questions. So the one thing I just wanted to point out again, this is one of those things that needs to keep being repeated, and he kind of even hinted that he should know the answer to this. When you see that you are in the top 3% of the world on Listen Notes, that is like saying, I am the top podcaster in Mogadore, Ohio. Like, okay, how many, you're saying it's a top 3% against all other podcasts, which goes back to 2000 and whenever. So that Listen Note stat is kind of caca, a poo-poo. And when people are quoting it, anybody that knows this, and I even said, dude, I'm not trying to like pee on your, Cheerios here, but like, when you quote the Listen Notes stats to show that you're an expert, anyone who knows that the Listen Notes stats knows, like, you just lost your credibility. Like, don't quote your Listen Notes stats is what I'm saying. And it's just like, ugh. So I say that to say, be careful who you use as a consultant. So I was like, that's interesting to say the least. But some of the things, just a lot of stuff in there. The whole, you have to launch with 3. No, you don't. You can. Absolutely. You can launch with 30. You can launch with 1. You need 1. So that was just.
If you do launch with 3, you'll have more than 2. That like some people don't just get to 1 and they go like, I don't know if I want to do this again.
Well,
I mean, we recommend all the time. I recommend all the time. Make a bunch of these before you even get started. So you make sure you want to do it.
Bingo.
Like, it's just, you go through a lot of trouble, especially for launch. You got to through a lot of effort, a lot of emotion, a lot of your time. You go through a lot of that to get this thing launched. And I just hate to see you do 2 or 3 and then, be like, it wasn't that great. I mean, you can. That's great about podcasting. Nobody says you can do, if you want to make 3 and be quit, that's great. But I think make a bunch of them, have them ready, release them in some intervals that work for you, and then stick with it if you can.
Yeah. DR says, where did he come up with 3? Somebody somewhere said 3, and it was like, oh, okay, it's gospel.
In the book writing world, this is really bad in the book writing world too. Everybody's like, number 2 in Canada on last Tuesday.
I started a post on because I started reading a podcast book, and the actual first sentence included the phrase, "I will double your income." And I was like, well, if I'm making $1, that's kind of easy to do. Yeah. But it was just so, and I was like, I really was like, I'm going to read this book now because I'm pretty sure it's full of BS, because right out of the gate, you're telling me how I'm going to make money with a podcast, and not that you can't, but I was just like, oh, I see where we're going with this. And I was like, what else are BS indicators? And one is the, you just said it. Amazon bestseller. When somebody says I'm an Amazon bestseller, I'm like, so was I. In the blogging category, which is a subcategory of a subcategory. It was like, come on.
For about 6 hours.
Yeah, it's like, I got the screenshot. That's all I needed,
Well, listen, here's another BS indicator is percentages in podcasting. When we talk about, because it's like, you just mentioned this, and I mentioned it when we talked about the Bitcoin. If you have 2 downloads and now you have 4, that's pretty sweet. From a percentage jump, but from an actual jump, it doesn't mean anything. I heard forget where I was listening to something, and they were talking about a whole bunch of percentages of, I think it was in Microsoft's earnings or something like that. And you go, but when a small company makes a jump, that's so much easier from a dollar perspective than a large company. Make more than a double-digit increase on a $1 billion revenue number. Well, that's a little bit harder than to do it when you're in the low, in the low thousands or in millions, right? So that's another. People like, oh yeah, a 40% increase, a 40% increase on what? Let's talk about unless. Well, that's not even true in this case. I was going to say, unless you're going to track it month over month, but we got to stop doing these percentage, whatever they are, and get to some real numbers.
Well, I know when I occasionally would do a poll and I would get, 17 respondents. And then you're saying, well, 40% of the people that respond, and like, okay, that was really 7 people. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
It stops making sense at some point.
Yeah.
Because
you don't want to say, well, I sent out a survey and a month later I'm up to 15 respondents. And so instead you say, well, of the people that responded, 33% were blah, blah, blah. And then 33%, I'm like, oh, wait, you really just had 3 people respond. Right, and everybody said 1. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Right. Daniel says to be in the top 3% on listen notes means you could still be at the bottom of 87,129 podcasts, according to their stats today. Yeah. Well, here's the thing, Tanner Campbell, and here's the fun thing about Tanner Campbell.
Uh-oh.
No.
Is this going to need to be an intervention? Or?
No. When Tanner Campbell came on the scene, and I've told this to Tanner, I thought he was an idiot. I thought he was the Donald Trump of podcasting, and let me clarify that before everybody gets triggered, in that he was saying outrageous things that would then lead to him being on somebody's show. He was on my show, he was on Todd and Rob's, but it got my attention, and I've been kind of following him on and off. He does a lot on Twitter, and I started listening to his podcast, and it turns out that, Tanner has changed his mind apparently on some of the Spotify things and this and that. And he's a guy that kind of like me likes to play with stuff. And he actually he and Jeff have invited me on a Twitter space. It's on Mondays. It's called the Podcast Power Hour. So to make a long story short, plus I met him at Podcast Movement after we had a pretty major, on Twitter. Like we were kind of hacking away at each other. And we just kind of like, hey, what's your side on that? Oh, here's my side. And we had this thing called a dialogue where we both, and I was like, oh, I see your point. Oh, yeah, I see your point. I don't agree with it, but I see your point. So we've kind of come to the conclusion that in the same way that Evo Terra occasionally will say things that I go, yeah, I'm not sure about that. I'm now following Tanner Campbell. So he did this experiment to see what does it take to get in the top 100 of Apple charts. And according to James Cridlin, he really wishes they would change those to Apple trending or Apple trends, because it's not really a chart. But anyway, Tanner purposely set up a group that said, I want you to subscribe on this day, you to subscribe on that way. I need like 10 people, blah, blah, blah. To make a long story short, he got on the top, he got in the top 100 with like 24 downloads and 10 subscribers. I'd have to double check myself, but it's much lower than whatever you think it is, which let's reverse analyze that. When somebody says, oh, I'm a top 100 podcast. Okay, maybe that's not quite as cool as we thought it was, but I thought it was interesting that he kind of tried to dissect what it was. I still say, I know part of the charts because Apple actually has a post somewhere that explains how they come up with their chart listings. And I remember part of it was how far people listen. And I was like, yes, please put that into the algorithm. But so that's something he's been working on, and I will find it later, but I know he put out a blog post, or James put out a blog post from Pod News about this. So it's interesting to see. And again,
where there is a system, there is a game.
Yep.
Right. I mean, every system we've set up, podcast awards, no matter who does them, rankings, those kinds of things, they can all be gamed. Right. I mean, we know that for sure. You know what can't be gamed, though, is actual audience engagement.
That's it.
Like, I can't game you buying something from me or you engaging with me in the podcast. You can't fake that, especially if there's money involved.
Right.
And so I really think that the true mark of engagement is that piece, stuff that can't be gamed. And it's tough to game your audience engagement that way.
Yeah. Daniel says top percent of what? Well, that's what James did. Is James then did research on Tanner's research and found out he was like the top 100 of books, which James said isn't even a public category. Like, you have to be kind of a nerd to look at this. And so he said it might show up in arts eventually. But and yes, if you want to listen to Tanner, he is not a safe for work. He's a guy he's one of these guys that, like, I'm going to drop an F-bomb. And for those people that only, like, if that's what's the word? If that signals to you that this person is real, because some people are like, no, man, I want F-bombs. I want F-bombs from my podcast consultant. Tanner Campbell is your man, because that's the way he rolls. But he does a show, Good Morning Podcasters. So, and realize that I listen to that, and some days I agree and other days I don't. I thought, well, he did an episode this week, since I'm sitting here explaining how, differences of opinion is okay. And apparently he and Brian Barletta from Sounds Profitable were going at each other on Twitter. And he said, you know what? What was weird is he said, look, like, his minions, I guess, were all like, let's go get Brian. And he's like, no, don't go get Brian. He's like, we're allowed to have a difference of opinion. Like, it comes down to this weird black and white. You either with me or against me. And if you're against me, you must die. It's like, no, you're allowed to have a difference of opinion. So
yeah, let's just have some dialogue. Like, let's just talk about it. It's all right.
Yeah. So let's see here. DR has a question. She says, daytime you publish your episode. In olden days, it was called appointment television, but now that everything is on demand, does it really matter which day and time you publish? Here's the only thing that kind of matters, and the answer is not really in my book, is when you publish, like I publish every Monday at 12:05 a.m. for the School of Podcasting. And so consequently, what I'm told is that Apple then notices that, because you're not in Apple until Apple comes around and you get on the Apple bus. When you hit publish, your show says released, but it's not. It's available. It's available to get on the Apple bus, the Google bus, the Amazon bus. It's at the bus stop. That's what your media host does. But until Apple comes by, it's not going to show up in Apple. And that can be anywhere from 20 minutes to 24 hours. So does it matter? In theory, Apple will come by more frequently, because it's like, hey, Dave usually is here by 12:05. Let's go see if he's there. That's what I hear. I've never taken the time to prove that. But I also know, for me, as a guy who probably has over 100 episodes waiting for him to listen to, it doesn't matter because I'm listening to stuff that's 6 months old. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, two ideas. One is post it at a time that works for you. That would be the number, because if it gets inconvenient, you'll stop doing it. And so build a system that works for you, however that is. If it's working for you, chances are, because so many of the downloads are going to come at random times anyways, I don't think it matters. If you do post on a regular day and you're listening, you get your listeners used to that, don't break away from it. Keep doing it. If you're going to do Monday at 6 a.m., make sure it's real, like it's realistic for you. If you're going to do Monday at 6 a.m., do every Monday at 6 a.m. so the listeners know they can start. I always publish Saturdays about 1 o'clock. And if my listeners don't get a Home Gadget Geeks episode by Sunday, I start getting emails like, hey, where's the show? Right? Because I kind of post it. So that's one. Two, depending on your audience size and the way you engage with them and your Google Analytics with them, you may see sometimes that where your audience is more awake or more available to engage with. And if you're doing more than just posting your episode, like, okay, that's one thing, but the advertising of the posting of that episode is something completely different. There may be times that are advantageous for you to post to Twitter or to post to Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, right? There may be times there, but that's a you decision. That's not an industry decision. It's not like, oh yeah, 7 p.m. in every time zone's there. Well, there's only one time zone. That 7 p.m. is rolling. So you've got to do the analytics on your audience and say, hey, as I'm advertising, which I think is more important than posting, just to be honest. I mean, you can't have one without the other, but when you're advertising this thing, there may be strategic times. Dig deep into your SEO and, into your Google Analytics for your website, which you should have. This is why you should have a website, to make sure you know when your audience is awake and the most receptive to what you're posting.
And the other, so realize that if I post if I hit release, like I have my media host, in this case, it's Libsyn set to post at 12:05 a.m. on Monday. That means sometimes it'll be in Apple by 12:30. And then other weeks, it may not be there till 1:30 or 2:30 or 3:30. And it's not your media host. And how you know it's not your media host is when you go over to Spotify, who seems to update very quickly, and you see the new episode there, but it's not in Apple. You know it's not your media host, because if it was your media host, it wouldn't be anywhere. And I'm not sure what it is. If you have a missing persons, don't they have to be missing for at least 24 hours? Is that how that?
Oh, something like that. I think it depends. But yeah, I get the point is you have to wait some time before they'll respond.
Yeah, and that is 24 hours. For Apple doesn't consider it a problem until 24 hours has gone by and it hasn't updated yet. So Craig has a great point. He says, hey, if you're watching live on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. Pretty please. Yeah, I put out an episode this week on YouTube, and I had someone approach me that inspired it, that said, who's the media host that's going to do the work? Like, who's the one that's going to promote me the most? And I kind of went, yeah, that's not, I mean, granted, there's Captivate. They all, I think, Buzzsprout has different ways they promote people. I know Libsyn has blog posts, and you can send in a promo. I mean, all the media hosts kind of promote their customers. But if you're looking for somebody to kind of hey, I just want to publish, and then you go and promote it for me, yeah, that's your job. And either
some do though. Some do.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the networks.
Oh, networks I could see. That's
like Audio Mac, which nobody knows of, right?
I've never heard of it.
Yeah. We haven't talked about these guys in a long time, but there's some at maybe I better clarify on this. The platform's not doing it for you. It's not like someone's picking up your podcast and advertising it, but on the platform itself is designed to be an advertisement. SoundCloud is one of these ways. When you post to SoundCloud, it's a social network, so people get an opportunity to interact with whatever you're posting that's there. Some do that social better than others. And so, there's a couple platforms that I post to. I do nothing, and I've, I get 90 to 100 listens on those platforms every single week, Dave, and have done nothing to advertise them there. So there's something going on the platform that's allowing me to get in front of people on the platform. Some do it better than others.
Yeah.
It's 100. It's not like it's it's 100.
Well, that and
keep it in.
If we're talking SoundCloud, probably 50% of those are, speaking of that, yeah, they're spam, and they just laid off 20% of their workforce. So, poor SoundCloud. It's I don't even want to jump on what's good is, the I Hate SoundCloud was replaced by I Hate Anchor. So I kind of,
you're right.
I kind of got,
you did. That got you off of SoundCloud for sure. And then you've actually been pretty kind to Anchor over the last 6 months or so.
Well, it's
like you're turning a new leaf.
Well, here's the thing. Speaking of that, I had a guy this week, and it's one of those where I was like, he wanted to I met him at a online kind of meetup thing, and he's like, hey, we should meet sometime and just talk. And I said, okay, what do we, just for the record, what are we going to talk about? And I kind of politely had, if we're going to talk about podcasting, I have a name for that. It's called consulting, and you can order some here. No. I just want to catch up and see if we could help each other. Great. It was a consulting call. And I was like, okay. But here's the thing that I thought was interesting is, and this is going to be the School of Podcasting's topic, and that is bright, shiny syndrome. And he was willing, he's already on a platform. He found it's not even an app yet, that's in Brazil, that's supposed to have 75 million people on it. They couldn't take his RSS feed from his current host, but they would take one from Anchor. And he was going to move to Anchor so he could be on some Brazilian thing that I'd never heard of. I said, okay, let's back up. Well, anytime we make decisions, let's go back to our why. Why are we doing this? Well, I want to start a podcast and probably eventually monetize. I go, okay, I don't know anything about Brazil because, well, I live in America and we are geographically challenged. If it's not about America, we kind of don't care. And I said, do people in Brazil have money, or are they your target audience? I don't know. I don't think so. I go, so you're willing to move your show from where you have your audience at around to Anchor, which you have to ask for an RSS feed. I need to double check that. I keep hearing that. I've not verified that myself. But anyway, Anchor, who wants you to kind of just promote things in Spotify. I was like, what's in it? It was just all this bright, shiny syndrome of this thing. And I was like, and again, it kind of comes back to this, oh, you know what I'm missing? That if I could just get that microphone, my numbers would go through. If I could just do this, if I could just do that. And I was like, no. So you'll hear more about that on, Spoon says, the chat room is having fun today, being ironic. They're talking about Blog Talk, not Talk Shoe. Where Tim has been great at this. How Tim promotes his show. He puts them on DVDs. And then he was, where's Tim? Where's the other one? He had one about, so I should be quoting, Chartable, not listen notes, which I found rather humorous. So it's just one of those, I always feel, in fact, in my YouTube video, at one point I put up an arrow that said Dave Jackson Dream Crusher. And I was just like, I'm just want you to be realistic that, that's all. I'm not trying to be,
but realistic doesn't sell.
No, it doesn't.
Let's just be clear. Nobody, the hype is what sells. And so that's people get all riled up and excited for it, and they get out there. It just the crash is a lot harder. That's the problem, is when the bigger the hype, the harder the crash, when they realize why isn't this working? I can't imagine all of the negative feedback John Lee Dumas got behind the scenes when, because he is the ultimate hype man for sure. And I am sure, a lot of what he says is true, and he's been very successful himself, and he's launched some successful people. But for every one successful person you launch, there's probably 9 that didn't make it, because it's not the formula, it's the person, right? This is what we forget. The formulas don't work. People work in this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
people have to do these kinds of things. And I just can't imagine the backlash of, well, you told me or you sold me or whatever, and it didn't work. Dave, I just can't.
Well, that definitely happened. We used to call it Ray, Daniel, and myself on the Podcasters Roundtable had John Lee Dumas on to talk about what we called the Dumas effect, which was like, hey, man, I'm doing, biking on fire. I'm asking the same 7 questions. I'm doing a daily show, and yet I've only made $38.14. Like, podcasting doesn't work. And we're like, no, you're just trying to be John, and there's already a John, and, that whole 9 yards. So, yeah, we used to call it the Dumas effect because people would be like, podcasting sucks. Like, why? Because I did everything he said. And it's like, you kind of missed it. You're trying to be John. You should be inspired by John, not trying to really do your show.
Be your own thing, from that perspective. Do it your way, right? And it may not be as successful if you do it. Look at, what was that show? What was that medical show back in the 90s that was so popular? Doctors.
ER?
ER. How many medical shows has that inspired? Like, it created a whole genre of its own. Scrubs. Well, it's comedy, but
I love
Chicago
Scrubs.
Fire and all those. Yeah. All those things, right?
Right.
And some of them, I don't know. I have never looked at the numbers. Maybe some of them were as successful or more. But they were all kind of versions of that. And some of those have done really well. So I don't want to necessarily say you can't be successful with somebody else's format, right? But because you can. I think you can be. I just think be yourself in this thing, right? Take somebody else's format and be yourself. Be authentic. Marcus Welby.
Nice. Quincy.
Oh my God. So many medical shows. Well, then think about the NCIS. No. What was the one before it? CIS, right? CIS.
Yeah. Oh, and there's CIS Miami, Poughkeepsie,
Omaha, CIS Omaha,
Ann Arbor.
So, then NCIS. Well, and some of those have had, look, NCIS, I think, was a spinoff of some of those, and it's actually been more successful than the original in a lot of cases. So it is possible, but be yourself.
Yeah.
Be original.
Well,
Miami Vice.
Miami Vice.
Chat room's on fire today. They are doing a nice job out there. It's very ironic.
Well, speaking of charts and speaking of doing experiments, I did an experiment I have a show on Buzzsprout because I try to have a show on every kind of talked about platform. And I did something I've never done. I released, I think, 10 episodes at once to see would like that 10th episode that's like 10th down now in the list get any kind of play. And the answer was, yeah, it kind of does. And so I wanted to share my screen here. I'll talk about what I'm looking at. So all these were released on August 8th. So it's been a whopping 4 days, something like that. And so the top one right now, like the next, when you log into, it's called Podcasting Resources is the name of the show. It's not a great show, by the way. It's one of those Dave Jackson. Yeah, it's like 4 minutes long. But anyway, so you can see where the one that I thought would get the most downloads would be the next one. So that would be basically the first episode you see. And that one's called Learn Pod Page for Free. And it got 12 downloads. But the one that got the most was way down in the middle that's called Charts, and More Charts. And it got 30 downloads in the last 3 days. If we go down here to December, you'll see where this one has 89 because it's been sitting there since December. It's been the first episode for 7 months. So that's why that one's got so many. But you can see 11, 7, 9. So it's interesting. I can see that people are going back and picking episodes based on the title is basically why I kind of did this. I wanted to see if any of the old catalog would get any kind of play, and it's getting some. But I also now see that this is where your titles really, really come in handy because people are like, oh, I want to hear what that one is. So it's an interesting experiment that I pulled off this week.
Sweet.
But
that's cool.
Yeah, there are charts. The other thing I'm finding out, if you're looking for a place to grow your show or advertise. That's something else I'm working on, are different places that you can advertise your podcast. There are more than I thought, tons of newsletters about podcasting. We've talked about James Cridlin. And Jim, if we go back to what you had said, who holds himself accountable? James pointed out on a recent episode, because somebody else kind of was like, it's kind of weird that your sponsors are the people you're reporting on. And he goes, well, say that to Acast, because he was the one that was saying these guys are a bunch of spamming idiots, and yet they were one of his sponsors. So that was kind of his remark to that. And I was like, oh, okay, I get that. And I think he's pretty fair. But anyway, there's Pod News, which you can advertise in. There's one, Find the Pod, I think it is. But there are a bunch of these. If you just Google Ariel, it rhymes with this and that. Nissenblatt, something. She works for Spotify. She works for Squadcast. She works with Sound Profitable. There are a bunch of these newsletters, and they're fairly affordable, $20-$30, and you get in front of like 3,000 people. And then some of them even show their open rate and things like that. So it's just another place to, if you're trying to get your podcast in front of people. And like the one, I think it's findthatpod.com. I'll have to remember. Those are people that are looking for new podcasts. So if you're looking for that, that might be a place versus spending $700 to, be in Overcast. I think Spotify is a minimum of $250 to advertise there. So earbuds, yeah, that's Ariel also does the earbuds thing. Ariel I've known of, and I've probably met her at an event. It's interesting. If you don't have album artwork, I can't remember you, it turns out. Because many times I don't recognize your name, and then I'll see your artwork, and I'm like, oh, I know you. And so I started kind of catching up with her in 5. I subscribe to her podcast. I listen to that. And yeah, Tom Webster says newsletters are gold. Yeah, they are. I am starting to, here's a novel idea. There's a great book that I've been talking about. Someday is Today by Matthew Dix. And he talks about the power of 15 minutes, because he said he had a woman who contacted him, because Matthew's written a number of books, and she was like, well, he's in a coffee shop, and she's like, well, I'm hoping to, get into a log cabin with a nice, antique desk with my favorite Merlot or whatever, getting the perfect writing environment. And Matthew's like, you're never going to write your book. And she's like, why? He goes, because that's just no. He goes, you weren't really late. He goes, I was probably more early, but look what I did in the 15 minutes while I was waiting for you. And he's like, he's got like 3.5 paragraphs of his book. He's like, you kind of just write wherever you are. And so I say that because I've noticed that last night I stopped myself. I watched 20 minutes of a Cleveland Browns preseason game. And I went, okay, why are you watching not only sports, nothing against sports, but when my goals have nothing to, this is not advancing my goals. Now you might say, oh, it's rest and relaxation. No, if you're a sports fan in Northeast Ohio, there's nothing relaxing about your teams, although the Guardians, formerly Indians, are in first place. So I say that because I'm stopping listening to podcasts that don't bring value, because they might, because it's on my subject. It's a podcast about podcasting. They might find something that I didn't hear. And I'm like, you know what? I've been listening to the show for 1.5 years, and I often skip it. So, and I'm reading more newsletters and I'm reading more books. Why? Because they deliver more value than podcasts. Did I say that out loud?
Some do. Some do. There are some that are just garbage, right? I mean, they just, you can tell somebody gave them the advice like, hey, you should have a newsletter. Okay. And then you get the newsletter and you're kind of like, I don't know, and you unsubscribe from it, right? I mean, then there's those who say they're going to do newsletters. I'm pointing to myself if you can't see. And then I get 3, it's like a podcast, and then I stop making them. I think they're powerful, to Tom's point. When you're consistent and you drive great content, sounds a lot like a podcast success, technique. If you're not a good writer and you struggle with writing and it's hard. I was listening to an interview this week on a podcast with a writer, and she said, I'll do anything except write. Like I'll go get a root canal because, I don't even need one, but I'm going to go get a root canal because I don't want to write, right? They're writers. They, if you struggle with this, chances are you coming out with a weekly newsletter or even a monthly, maybe a little more than you actually want or can actually do. If you can't do it and you need to have a newsletter, partner with somebody, I'm sure there are plenty of people you can pay to do this for you. It is very effective, Dave, to your point. We've had at Gallup, we've had very good luck with our newsletters. And we have dedicated writers. That's their job. They make the newsletter every month. And so we do monthly. Weekly is just a little too. We're not reporting on news. James wouldn't. Monthly would be worthless to him.
Right.
In fact, he could probably does his daily.
His is daily. In fact, He was talking about how he had Evo on his show because his regular co-host was out, and he was talking about how Evo used to do a daily, podcast pontifications, and then he switched to, I think he's bi-weekly. I'm not sure exactly what his new schedule is. And James said, yeah, but Evo, you could batch process podcast pontification. You can't batch process the news.
No.
That doesn't work. And so when James, does something like, get married and takes a few days off, come on, priorities. What the heck? Where's the newsletter? What do you mean?
Exactly. Yeah. You should batch process that, at least for a couple days. I mean, it doesn't always have to be the most current news. You could stuff that with some fluff. Jeez.
Do a couple episodes on how Spotify sucks. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but here's the beauty of a newsletter is, especially if you're doing a show where the podcast is the marketing arm of your products and services, which, by the way, is the number one way you make money with a podcast, not advertising. But it's when somebody opens up your newsletter. So number one, that's hard to do. If you can get 40% of your people to open your newsletter, holy cow, that's amazing. But they are now one click away from doing whatever you wanted them to do. That's the real power, I think, of a newsletter. For me, is the fact that you've got their hand is in their mouse, and their hand is in their mouth. That doesn't make any sense at all. Their mouse is in their hand, and if you want them to click on something, they're real close to doing that. So the other beauty of a newsletter is if for some reason an atomic bomb goes off on your podcast. So maybe you're on Jim's House of Hosting, and Jim dies and whatever, the server gets rusty and falls apart, whatever, and there's nobody to contact. What was that one? There was a media host that recently went out of business. I forget what it was. It was free. Shocking that a free media host went out of business, but for whatever reason, something has gone horribly wrong. You can at least reach out to the people that subscribe to your newsletter to say, hey, remember how we had Dave's House of Smelt? It's now, just find me over here on this website. Blah blah blah. It's another way to
shout engine.
Yeah. So it's also a way for you to, in some cases, these are people that have taken an extra step. They've purposely said, I want more information from you. And this is sometimes where I will say, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. Do you have any thoughts on this or that? So sometimes I'll use my newsletter people at schoolofpodcasting.com/newsletter to bounce an idea off. Like, is this something you're interested in, or have I gone down a rabbit hole that I shouldn't have? So there are all sorts of fun things too. And there's MailChimp has a free version. Mailer Lite, I think, is my free favorite version. They let you have, I think, a couple thousand people for free. They all eventually have to charge you because, free is not a business model. But I'm with Jim. If you're not into writing, then don't. I do a thing. Because the thing I love about short shows, and which is now coming up with TikTok, if you watch a bad TikTok, you kind of don't hate that person because they wasted 30 seconds of your life. So my newsletter consists of, here's what I did this week, here's what caught my eye. So there's a paragraph. And then it's like, and here are my latest episodes. School of Podcasting, click here. Ask the Podcast Coach, click here. Podcast Rodeo, blah, 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 and that's it. That's literally it. Here's what I'm working on for next week. So if for some reason somebody opens my newsletter and goes, well, that wasn't much. Okay, but it took you maybe 10 seconds to read it. And when you open up the second one and you see that it's really a paragraph and a bunch of links, that's kind of what I told you were going to get. And if you don't want that, then there's the subscribe button. But Tom says it sounds profitable. It's the centerpiece of everything we do. It sounds profitable.
It's a smart strategy. I mean, build from as a research organization, you know, that newsletter keeps people in the know. We do the same thing at Gallup, and our newsletters have become super, super important. And then the podcasts become a support for that. Now, we do it a little bit different in Gallup, but the podcasts kind of support those initiatives. I think if well done, written well, put together well, and to the exact target audience, man, that's just gold. Because if they got to opt in to get it, they got to want to get it, they got to stay on it if they want to, you know, in most cases, if they want to keep getting it, they'll stay subscribed. It's a very, very hot audience from a an acquisition standpoint. So if you can get it, do it well, do it on a regular basis, get people to subscribe to it, get it known. And it takes a while. Like you can't start you wouldn't start a newsletter in January and expect in February to have 15,000 subscribers. Well, I mean, I guess you could. It depends on your audience, but it takes a while to build those things up.
And it depends on how much you promote it as well. The other thing that a newsletter can do, like Jim said, once you build up the audience, is now if you're trying to sell ads on your show and you go, well, Mr. Advertiser, it's X amount of money to be mentioned in the show. It's X amount of money to be in the show description and X amount of money to be in the newsletter. By the way, we're having a special right now, 3 months in all three, sign here, blah, blah, blah. And so that's another thing that you can monetize, which kind of brings me back to what I was talking about. I'm finding more of these podcasts about podcasting, and most of them have a place where it's like the podcast spotlight of the week. Ariel has something like that in her podcast that I was looking at. And I was like, this is another way to get the word out if you got an extra 20, 30, 50 bucks lying around. And again, keep in mind, let's go back to Dave Jackson, Dream Crusher. You're going to get maybe 3 to 5% of those people that will click on your show and then take 3 to 5% of those. Maybe it's a little higher because they clicked on the name of the show. They kind of know what they're getting into. But just because you advertise in a newsletter doesn't mean, oh, there it is, 10,000 downloads. That's all I had to do was spend that $30. So it gets a little tricky, but I should do more of mine every week. Like Friday, that's all I thought about Friday. I should put out a newsletter today. And it's Saturday, and guess what didn't happen yesterday? Yeah. So
it's you got to plan for it. You got to do it. I was meeting with our marketing team on Thursday, Friday, something like that. And one of my marketing teammates said, you know what I'd really like to see from you? I'd love to see more LinkedIn articles. And that not what I was expecting. She was like, your LinkedIn reach is pretty profound in what we're doing. And if we could get you writing more, and I said, I'm just not a great writer, to be honest. That's not what I love. If you want me to do that, I'm going to need some help. And so so with that, then I went back and I thought, you know what? We do produce a newsletter that I could just take content from that. That's our content. I could take that content, modify it, put it in my LinkedIn article and publish it that way. And so I'm going to do some more of that repurposing of that content to still meet that need and at the same time get some content out. Yeah.
Now, the one thing that newsletters don't have is tone of voice. And to me, when I I hear things by Tom Webster, and I hear the cool, smooth jazz intro, which is actually probably nothing like the actual music because I'm listening at like 1.25 or something like that. You don't get the sarcasm. It's hard to be sarcastic, at least from what I've seen in a newsletter. You can do things like bold and italics and things like that, but tone of voice is always kind of interesting. It's another aspect. If somebody said, well, why do you do a podcast about such and such. It's like, well, I'm busy getting rid of a troll. Sorry, I can't.
Yeah, no.
I can't eject trolls. And
no worries. While you're doing that, let me ask the audience a question, and Dave, I'll ask it of you as well while you're taking care of business there. I didn't log in as me this morning, so I can't help you. Sorry about that. While I was on my trip this last weekend listening, or driving for 12 hours each way, I listened to a lot of podcasts. And Dave, for you or audience, I'm kind of wondering, what do you think your max number of hours in a row is to listen to podcasts? And the reason I ask this question is I tend to think I enjoy podcasts so much that I think in my brain, I could listen to podcasts all 12 hours, like all the way down, all the way back. I love listening to podcasts. I love the podcasts I'm subscribed to. I listen to them all the time. But I found at one point, I was like, like I had to stop it. Like it caused a physical reaction for me. Like, okay, stop talking. Like I need some quiet. Have you ever come across that, Dave, for yourself?
Yeah.
Where you're like, I just can't listen anymore.
Yeah. For me, it's probably somewhere between 2 and 3 hours. And it kind of depends on the show I'm listening to. Because most of the shows I listen to are me that I want to almost take notes on. So if I'm listening in the car, I'm like, oh wow, that's a good point. And it's not just fluffy entertainment that's, this is going to make me laugh or whatever. It's usually stuff I'm trying to learn stuff, and your brain can only absorb so much. And so that's where I will flip over to Spotify and listen to some music and sing along in the car or whatever, kind of give my brain a break. Yeah. And then I will go back and do that. I will say that because I'm an old deaf musician, Audible, whatever their audio standard is not loud enough for me in the car. I have to turn my radio all the way up to listen to an audiobook. So I usually listen to podcasts in a car. But for me, it's probably somewhere between 2-3 hours to where, like you said, my brain's kind of like, enough. You're giving me information. Let me process this for a bit, And
like I have a reaction to it. Like at one point, I'm like, oh, okay, like I got to do something different. I can't. And for me, it's like 4 hours. That seems to be in the talking. I actually have a kind of a negative reaction to it. I'm like, okay, I need quiet. Like I just stop. I need that stop talking. So that was as I was listening to, I'd go 4 hours, then I'd probably go 2 listening to the radio and then come back for some more podcasts. I was kind of wondering, is that a me limit? Is that Craig in the chat says he has no limit when he gets bored. He just changes genre. And I do too, still have a limit. He says he's really multitasking and not listening. Well, that's not Craig. I'm kind of, while I'm driving, I'm listening. I told you, Dave, I was listening to Throughline or Radio Lab. Those are my 2 favorite NPR podcasts. And I was coming out of Dallas, and the next thing I knew, I was on the other side of Oklahoma City. If you've driven that before, that's a significant difference or distance. And I was like, how did I get this far? I must have been so locked into what was going on with the podcast because I know I didn't sleep. I was driving. So I must have been so locked into the content that I just kind of blocked everything else out. One, I know you probably have a pretty good podcast if you can get your listener in that kind of flow, right?
Well, that's the other thing that will trigger me to stop listening to podcasts, or as Craig does, is I will move to a different one. Is if I'm listening to somebody's podcast and all of a sudden I find myself thinking about the next episode I'm going to record, or for whatever reason, my brain has wandered. I'm like, that's not fair. This person, put their time and effort into this podcast. I'm not even paying attention to it. Where part of me then thinks maybe it's not that good. But there are just times when I'm ADD takes over and I will stop listening there because I'm like, nah, I'm not really doing that. And that's when I'll try music or I'll go to a book or something like that. Uncle Marv here says, in the car is where I have the most focus, but the 2 to 3 hours is my max. I'll switch to music for about 20 minutes and then go back to podcasts. That's exactly what I do. I don't know. It's just, like I said, my brain needs a break after a while.
I can't listen to podcasts on planes. It's the weirdest thing. It's you're just sitting there, and I can't. I actually don't have the focus that you'd think you'd have on a plane. It's crazy. But driving a car when I'm the one driving, oh man, I can listen. Well, 4 hours is apparently the most. Craig says he doesn't think he's driven ever more than 3 or 4 hours straight. If he drove 5 hours, he'd end up in the sea.
Yeah, that's the problem when you're overseas.
On a small island or small country from that standpoint.
Yeah. I remember in Texas, I was in Fort Worth and I had to drive to Houston, and it was 6 hours. And the whole time I'm like, are we seriously still in Texas?
It's the same. And it's just from Houston to Dallas. No. Yeah. Houston to Dallas. Right. Yeah. And it looks exactly the same the whole way.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing changes. You're like, oh, and listen, Texas friends, you guys have some weird freeway, like, in the rest of the United States, you have an exit. In Texas, you have eternal exits because they have freeways and then they have roads that go by the freeway.
Yeah.
And you can get off and on and it's Texas. What are you thinking?
It makes it really weird because you're like, oh, over there, that's where I want to go. And then you can't because you have to drive another 4 miles.
Yeah. You got to take an exit and do a roundabout.
Yeah.
Right. You turn around and come back at it from the other direction. You're like,
yeah.
All right. They say it's more efficient, but it's the only state that does
that. It's a Texas thing. Yeah. But speaking of our Texas friends, we also have friends out at askthepodcastcoach.com/support. And Jim, did you get to hear this on the show? This is we spotlight a random awesome supporter, and I can hear the buzz already. Doesn't that sound great?
That's all right.
Yeah.
We'll get past it.
Alexa, open awesome supporters.
Okay, let me pick from askthepodcastcoach.com/support. It's Ed at soniccupcake.com.
There we go. So go see Ed over at soniccupcake.com. And Ed, thanks for being an awesome supporter. If you would like to try Podpage, well, go over to trypodpage.com. And if you want to learn Podpage, you can learn it for free at learnpodpage.com. Ask the Podcast Coach runs on that. It's my favorite platform for that. If you just need more Jim Collison, and isn't that just an everyday occurrence, go over to theaverageguy.tv and check out Home Gadget Geeks. And if you're thinking of starting a podcast, well, hey, when you think podcasting, think School of Podcasting. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/support. I do want to say that I was a bad boy and did not do my homework this morning. We had somebody sign up, and I remembered it at the moment, and I was like, oh, wait, I need the big ooh-ah music and the big, and I was like, you know what, we're going to welcome them next week. But that doesn't mean we don't need you to subscribe. So go over there and sign up, and you will be part of that big ooh-ah celebration next week. So, but
I like the use of that technology. It does. Last week you muted the wake name, and you didn't mute it this week.
I totally forgot about that. My apologies to everybody that just went, I don't know if I can help with that. Yeah, that's
I wonder what happened to the other devices. We call her the A lady, is what we say. I wonder what happened. DR, it fired it off for you. Tell us in the chat what happened.
Yeah, she probably said I can't help you with that or whatever. Yeah, I didn't even think about it.
Because it's a skill you're using to do that, right? It's an Amazon skill.
Yeah, there's a thing you can basically make your own. They're called blueprints. And I took a blueprint that said random name, and the idea is you put your kid's name in it and then say whose turn is it to wash the dishes, and I just put in a bunch of names, and then I had to spell out things like Sonic Cupcake .com, .com kind of thing. Yeah, that's what she said. Yes, it's I can't help you with that. So
that could be both ways. That's what she said.
Yeah. Well, the fun thing was I got tired of, first I switched her to a man's voice who had like the total 5 o'clock weather guy, hey, it's windy. And that was weird. And then I turned it off to where now when I say, hey, lady in the tube, turn off the light, and it just goes bing. And I was like, well, now I kind of miss her voice because it's just bing. I'm like, So I can't find that happy medium. Here is a fun one that sometimes people make this harder than it needs to be. And that is, how do I set up the Rodecaster Pro to record a Zoom call? It says, I'm recording my first podcast via Zoom, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to record it. I have a Rodecaster Pro. My co-host does not. Doesn't matter. My co-host has the Zoom app, which is great. Should I run my audio through the Rodecaster to my laptop via USB and have the Zoom call app record the session? Yes. Or should I run my audio through my Scarlett interface? Nope. Into the laptop via USB? Nope. And run the audio from my laptop out to the Rodecaster Pro? I guess you could do that, but there's a better way, which is why I'm bringing this up. Or is there a better way where the Rodecaster Pro can record everything? The Rodecaster Pro is the original version. Thanks in advance. Only I will be recording the audio. And this is where people, like right now I'm in the StreamYard, and it doesn't matter if it's StreamYard, Zoom, Skype, whatever. You go in and you say, hey, my microphone is the Rodecaster and my speakers are the Rodecaster. So in this case, Jim is on channel 2. I'm on channel 1. Now, if Jim had, another person in the room, they'd both be on channel 2. I can't get multiple tracks that way, but you basically just set it up so that you're on channel 1 and then they are on channel 2. You can record it there and then record it in Zoom, because you always, always, always want to have 2 recordings going, because the more important the guest on the Zoom meeting, the better the chance that Zoom is going to eat that, because that's just the way it works. And that way you've got a backup on the Rodecaster, or if you're using a Zoom PodTrack P4, something like that. Or if you're doing Zoom and you have Hindenburg Pro, you can say, hey, Hindenburg, listen to my microphone on channel 1. And in the Pro version of Hindenburg, there's an option for other communications, and that would be your guest on Zoom, and they would be on channel 2. So again, a way to get 2 recordings of that, because it just never fails that the more important. Jim, do you know how many episodes you've lost doing different shows? Have you lost any?
Maybe just one. Just one. Most of the time it's because I forgot to hit record. Well, that's why I always tell you, like, make sure you hit record. But no, maybe 1 or 2 where I didn't. We relied on one thing. Maybe in the old Google Hangout days. Yeah. I don't know if I've ever lost anything on StreamYard so far. No, I think we've had I've had a perfect record so far. Yeah, that's true. For me, I usually tell people 400 episodes, somewhere in the first 400. Yeah. If you're just using one device. Yeah. And the reason I say that is I remember when Mark Maron was like at episode 389 or something like that, and he used to record directly into GarageBand, I think is what he was using. And he lost it. Whatever the episode was, just was like, sorry, not coming back. And so, that's when I was like, you gotta have some sort of portable recorder going or something like that. Go that route. Steven. Well, hold on. Before we move to that comment. Okay. So if it's 1 in 400,
right.
Isn't it easier just to re-record one than to set up a whole bunch of redundant systems? Like, well, I get it. It always happens on the most important one. Right. And the keys are always the last place you look. Right. I mean, right. That's kind of okay. So is there a point of diminishing return of having all these systems only for 1 in 400? That seems, I don't know. That's maybe a little debatable.
Yeah. If I don't record duplicate, if it's just me, like if I'm doing a solo show, no duplicates. Why? Yeah. Because it's super easy for me to do it again. But the one that that inspired this always record duplicate thing was, years ago. And I was talking to Paul Culligan, and we had this phenomenal conversation. And I forget the name. It was a Skype recorder of some sorts. And we get done, and I hit stop, and it just, everything froze, and just, you're like, And so I called Paul back on Skype, and he's like, are you doing the call of shame? I go, I am doing the call of shame. He's like, all right, one more time with feeling. And we talked about the exact same thing, like same questions, same answers, like even maybe a little more efficient. It wasn't the same. it just wasn't the same. And it was like, so
I might have waited. A couple weeks before I re-recorded that. Because if you do it same day, you're right. The second time is never as good. It just isn't. You can't force that. You can't force that first time, right?
Yeah, and so that's when I was like, And then when I recorded Adam Curry, so that was one I'd been chasing for years. And I think my Roadcaster took a crap on me on that one. And luckily we did that on Squadcast. So I was like, it just, for me.
It never fails. Fails. Yeah.
But, and especially I guess it depends on your setup. Like for me to record a duplicate is pressing a button because I'm always going through the Roadcaster. Or if I was using the Zoom PodTrack, I'd always that's my interface basically. So I guess the tricky part would be if I was using something like a Vocaster from StreamYard. Oh, great. We're almost done. I have a air show in the neighborhood. I felt like I was in a war zone yesterday. It was great fun. But if I was using a Vocaster, I would probably have some sort of output to a recorder just again to record a stereo mix of everything just in case. So the other thing I thought we could talk about just here at the end is our lovely troll that was in the chat room today.
Oh, yeah.
Then if you noticed, I ignored the first thing he said. I was like, all right, don't feed the trolls. That's typically my answer. Don't feed the troll. And because that's what they want, is they want attention. So if I had said whatever, or even typed something, I completely ignored the troll who was saying rather lewd and crude things in the chat room. And when he put up the second one, I was like, all right, it's time for you to leave. So the general rule for me is ignore the troll. But as I had said, they want attention. So when we completely ignored that person the first time, then they repeated, hey, I'm doing a newsletter, and then lewd, crude, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, I get it. So,
it happens. It happens. I'm surprised we don't get more, just to be honest with you.
Well, especially when we've got askthepodcastcoach.com/join scrolling across the bottom. Yeah. I'm really surprised we don't have people that come on and go, listen to my show and blah, 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 and then leave. So,
but you did a pretty good job of getting them out of the chat room pretty fast and banning them. You can, Google gives you some tools to be able to do that. And, there's a bunch of folks in the chat room didn't even notice.
I'm surprised because when I read it, I was like, does that say, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But,
that may have blocked it. YouTube is doing more to block those kinds of things. You may have seen that, but it may not have made its, because you're an administrator.
Oh,
so it may not have made its way to actual chat. I don't know. A lot of folks are saying they didn't even see it.
Yeah.
I was looking for it earlier. I saw you remove them, but I didn't see them. I didn't see that.
Okay. Because he was talking about,
you don't have to repeat it.
Yeah. Okay.
You don't have to repeat it. We banned him because he said
that. Yeah.
No. It's we. I had that happen at Gallup one time where it was racist and it was horrible. And of course, somebody captured the thing. They did a screen grab of the thing. I was in there hammering to get it out as fast as I possibly could. And of course, one of the listeners screen grabbed it and sent it to me. And I was like, how dare you allow? And I'm like, well, I was removing it.
Yeah.
We were in the middle of something and I was removing it. Right. And it must have maybe been there for 10 or 15 or 20 seconds. So it wasn't there very long. And they spelled out a word that I won't repeat down.
Yeah.
Down the thing. And so that made it even harder to get rid of because I had to remove each one of those going, but I'm really surprised. We do some big, I think we had 750 live the other day. Well, let's say 500. We had about 500 live the other day. Those show up on spammers' radars.
Right. So
the bigger your live thing is going to be, you probably better be ready to get rid of the spam when it comes in.
Yeah, I did want to answer. I'd started this. This is from a while ago. DR had asked, is your host the only trustworthy place to get your stats? Only is kind of a strong word there. Because if it's not, then it's PodTrack or like Blueberry is IAB certified. And I've heard Todd say that when you use their redirect, they had to do more stuff to get IAB certified via a redirect. So there's more to it, I think, than your standard stats. So I would always, if your media host is IAB certified, that's where I would go. I always get confused. I see people at Libsyn that will literally have Chartable. They will have PodTrack, maybe even PodSites. So when you hit play, it goes to that person who sends it to that person who sends it to that person who finally sends it to the media file. And I do go, you do realize that's 3 places that your show can break now. And like, what are you getting from these extra stat places that you're not getting from your media host? So I always kind of scratch my head on that. I think some people are like, oh yeah, but they can help me find sponsors. I'm like, according to your stats, you have 27 downloads. You might be a little premature on that. So yeah, that's where I would always start with stats. And if you're using, like somebody asked about anchor stats in Facebook. So I was like, what are anchor stats? I haven't even looked. And they don't give you much. They give you like how many downloads and I think what app people are using on and maybe geographic, which kind of in a way is like, what else do you need? They also give you, because they're owned by Spotify, demographic stuff, because Spotify has that, how many male or female and things like that. And you can see that in your Spotify stats as well. So thanks for that question. And Jim, what's going on at theaverageguy.tv?
Took the week off this week, so nothing out there. But we had Dan Lefebvre on the week I was off, and Dan and I spent some time talking about cameras and some other cool tech stuff. And so, if you want to hear Dan do something other than based on a true story podcast, you can catch him home. It's out there right now, homegadgetgeeks.com.
And on the School of Podcasting, it's weird. I'm hoarding interviews because I'm going to use one while I'm at Podcast Movement, because I realize I'm not doing an episode that week. So I think I'm going to talk a little bit about what I talked about today. I have a couple other examples of shiny syndrome, where people do things based on, oh my gosh, that. So I kind of did a little bit of that today on the show. So that's coming up, along with some insights on the mental part of podcasting. How do I keep mentally positive when, things are hard? And I'm like, I got some answers for that as well. So that's coming up on the School of Podcasting. I want to say thanks to everybody out in the chat room, and thanks to Mark over at podcastbranding.co and Dan over at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, you can do that. Go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And there was something else I was going to mention, and I can't remember what. Oh, we're here every Saturday. Oh, wait, Podcast Movement.
Yeah, are we going to be here? Because that goes up until Friday. Are we back?
Yeah. So the 27th, is a no-go. I will not. Okay. I will not be here. So I should have said that at the beginning of the show. But yeah,
taking a break, and you're not going to live stream or anything from Podcast Movement.
No, I will be probably hoarse and half dead. So and hopefully COVID free. So
yes,
that's the goal. So thanks to everyone. We will see you next week, every Saturday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern on Ask the Podcast Coach. So we'll see you next week.